right there.
There
Okay.
you go. Now you're recording.
Okay, perfect. I'm not sure why it doesn't show it on mine.
It does show it.
Where do you see
right there? See the red
okay,
button?
great.
Yeah.
So we've started recording now with the this is a picture. The picture just prior to this, I showed you the Brandt's cormorant in breeding plumage. They have a beautiful blue pocket on the below their bill pouch, and these white bristle-like feathers that come out of their face and on their scapulars on their back. A very gorgeous bird in breeding plumage. So here's a couple of Brandt's, the higher ones, with a pelagic cormorant. And take a look at the comparison. The pelagic cormorant's neck is almost twice as thin as the Brandt's. It gives it sort of a serpent-like look. And their beak is almost like needle size compared to the thick, stout Brandt's. And if you can see, they have a very long tail and white rump feathers sticking out from their rump. When they're in flight, they fly with their neck straight out, which is unlike the other cormorants that fly with their neck folded.
Well, Brandt's fly with their neck kind of straight
Kind
out
of
too.
Intermediary.
But double crested are very, very notched.
You can see the two white rump patches that they have during their breeding plumage as well as incredible iridescent colors on their back and their head.
Yeah.
So these photos were taken actually at Bodega Head. The pelagic cormorants will nest right there on along the pelagic or along the Bodega Head, so you can see them often in their breeding colors flying out from the cliff face. So another bird we'll see on the rocks as we head out to sea is the black oyster catcher. Probably most of you are familiar with this bird, but I'm just truly amazed every time I see it by how bright orange red their bill is, fleshy color their feet, and they have a beautiful eye. Oops, sorry, the next picture shows their eye. It's a very yellow eye, but it's circled with an orbital ring that is kind of reddish orange, almost the same color as their beak. This one was calling out. They have a pretty loud call in the wild, especially when they're flying. So that is a giveaway to help you to find them. They're basically all black with a bright orange bill and flesh-colored legs. Interesting thing about the black oyster catcher is they often mate for life, and they will return year after year to the same spot and breed. So on Bodega Head, there's 2 or 3 pairs that are breeding out there that you might get to see if you ever go out on the head.
And 2 in Benicia.
Oh yeah, 2 in the Benicia. Here is a black turnstone. Turnstones love the rocky environment. We showed you the ruddy turnstone earlier. Well, this is a very close relative, the black turnstone, mostly black with some beautiful white edging to the feathers. When they fly, they have a beautiful black and white pattern on their back, and they usually are quite noisy when they fly too, which can help you to locate them. Again, they use their stout bills to flip over rocks and feed on algae and flies. Some of their favorite foods in the winter are mussels and barnacles, so they can use that stout bill to chisel them apart. So here's another bird that we really love. It's called the surf bird. They love the spray, so they're often out right on the rocks right next to the spray. Amazing thing about this bird is that they breed on the west coast of Alaska in sort of coastal sedge meadows. And then when they head south for the winter, some of the birds stay as far north as Kodiak, Alaska, whereas others get all the way to the Straits of Magellan, way at the tip of South America. So they have actually the longest wintering zone of any North American bird, from Alaska to the tip of South America.
And you won't see this bird commonly in the Bay Area in summer, in midsummer.
Oh, for sure.
June,
And
late June.
and they're not always easy to find even in the winter. They believe population estimates are only about 100,000 birds, give or take 20,000. So when they're spread out from Alaska to the tip of South America, you can see how few birds you may actually encounter. This is the surf bird. Here's a bird that probably has even fewer birds. It's called the Wandering Tattler. This bird we actually took a picture of in Monterey right after one of our pelagics. But you can see them on the rocks oftentimes as the boat pulls out. Once again, they're estimated as maybe only 25,000 of these birds. The amazing thing that we find them is that for the most part, they will winter in New Zealand and Australia and Micronesia. Only a few come down the coast of North America. So it's pretty wonderful that we get a chance to find one or two now and then.
Yeah, and they breed in the tundra, similar to surf bird. All those rocky shorebirds breed high up in that same type of habitat.
And the amazing thing about the tattler is very little was known about them because they tend to breed on glacial rivers where they get lost in the gravel bar. People can't even see them. They may breed just off the gravel bar in the vegetation nearby, but they're very hard to locate up in the far north where they breed. So very little is known about them. And then they take off across Micronesia, which makes them even harder to study. So here's a California sea lion, one of the sea lions, the most common sea lion, certainly on the West Coast. It's an eared seal, so you can see the tiny little ears that it has. It has the front flippers and the back flippers, so it can walk around almost like sitting up. Females of the California sea lions might weigh as much as 250 pounds or so, and the males can get up to 700 pounds. So it's a pretty sizable animal. If you've ever seen their skull, the skull looks a lot like a bear skull. And in fact, they weigh sort of in the same vicinity of a bear. So it's not probably an animal you want to walk right up to and try to pet. The population has been increasing since 1975 when protections were put in place. They love to feed on squid and anchovies, mackerel, rockfish, sardines, and other fishes. Here is a cousin to the California sea lion, the Steller's sea lion. And this is a much more massive, this picture doesn't really show how big it is, but in the Stellers, the females can weigh 500 to 700 pounds, like the size of a male California sea lion, and the males can weigh as much as almost 2,500 pounds. They're massive in comparison. Typically, their fur is much lighter in color. Their population had decreased in the 60s through the 90s, losing more than 50% of their animals, but they're slowly beginning to rebound. They're not quite sure what caused the population decline. You know, was it the use of pesticides? Was it increasing numbers of orcas and great whites? Or was there some disease associated with El Nino? They're not quite sure, but fortunately, their population is starting to increase. On the way out, once we leave the harbor, we often will see migrating shorebirds. These are short-billed dowitchers, which migrate down along the coast and is typically considered to be the coastal dowitcher.
Very hard to differentiate from long-billed dowitcher, as they look virtually identical. Besides the 3-note, they make a 3-note metallic 222, almost yellow legs like. And long-billed were to make a pip, just a single pip note.
This picture doesn't show it, but if they turn the other way, you would see like a white diamond going up their back, and that's really helpful in IDing them. Also, of course, as dowitchers, of course, their long bill is also somewhat of a giveaway. So we showed you the elegant term earlier. This could be a royal term, but it also could be the immature elegant that we were looking at. The reason I wanted to bring it to your attention is elegant terns only have 5 small colonies left where they breed. And almost 90% of those are breeding in Mexico. The other colony, some of you may have heard of Bolsa Chica Reserve in San Diego area, and the San Diego Bay is where they are, sorry, in the LA area is Bolsa Chica near Newport Beach, and in San Diego Bay, they're also nesting. So there's probably less than 30,000 pairs of elegant terns. What's really nice for us is that they leave their breeding grounds in June at some point, and they usually start arriving up in the Bay Area at the end of June, the beginning of July, and they'll stay here through about September or October. And that's when you can see them. You can see them oftentimes at Bodega, Santa Cruz, Monterey. And they don't every year come this far north, but most years they do. What's cool about them is they'll often have this bird following them along. This is the Parasitic Jaeger, and it is one of the predators of the open sea. And they will, in their nesting season, they will oftentimes nest in the Antarctic and feed on penguin eggs and other bird eggs that are colonial birds. But during migration, they'll usually chase gulls and force them to regurgitate the food that they've captured, and then they'll gobble up that regurgitated or dropped bird.
And the reason this is a parasitic Jaeger and not like a Pomeranian or longtailed is because if you look at these shafts, these white shafts on the edge of the wing right here. I don't know if you guys can see the cursor, but right here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 6 or 7 main white shafts. And on long-tailed, there would be 1, 2, or 3. And Pomeranian would have the same amount, but Pomeranian would be much bigger and bulkier.
So this Parasitic Jaeger is a fairly mid-sized Jaeger and fairly streamlined with a fairly straight bill compared to the Pomeranian, which is like a tank. And all Jaegers are best ID'd more by their structure than by their coloration, because their coloration varies a lot, and also because they essentially look very similar, have so many similarities. It's better to look at their shape and their structure. Here's an immature Parasitic Jaeger that was flying by too. This is a pretty stocky one, so it was a little bit difficult to tell if this was a Parasitic Jaeger or not. But if you look at the bill's fairly uniform in size. The wings, although they're pretty stocky, they go out pretty far. So another bird that you might see along the coastal rocks is this wonderful Pigeon Gilma.
Yeah.
They breed on coastal rocks, usually finding a crevice to weasel down into to lay their eggs. There are breeding pairs on Bodega Head, which is a great place to see this bird. They're essentially an all-black bird with a massive white slash on their wings and bright red feet. It's really fun to see them out at sea, because usually they'll dive and you'll see their bright red feet kicking to take them down to depths.
Yeah, and they have a whistly high call. It's very, very cool.
So they nest on the rocky shores and coastal cliffs, and they feed near the bottom of the ocean floor, and they prefer not to dive in very deep water. So they typically will try to feed very close to the shore where it's 20 to 100 feet, and they'll dive down and feed on sandfish and cod and sculpins and invertebrates in shallower water. They typically don't migrate very far, and they are breeding all the way from Siberia and Alaska to California.
The strange thing about Pigeon Gilmas is they actually go further north in the winter. And in this, or wait, yeah, they go further north in the winter, and further south in the summer.
Yeah, they have fairly little migration. So if they do move during the winter, they might move north where there might be more food.
They do move a little bit.
The young will often stay in the nest for a week or two, and then they will jump off the cliff and land in the sea. So the parents spend some time with the young, um, helping them to find food and learn the tricks of the trade. So this is an adult here, obviously, and a young Pigeon Gilma on the left. So this is probably the most prolific bird in our area. This is the common myrrh. It's estimated that they have a population somewhere between 10 and 20 million. What's amazing about the common myrrh is that they will breed shoulder to shoulder in packed-in communities. For example, at Point Reyes, there's a myrrh colony of about 10 to 15,000 myrrhs. It's pretty hard to estimate population when they get to be that many, but there's a lot of myrrhs at Point Reyes. And this lower picture here is just a small piece of their colony on the Farallones. When you get to the Farallones, it's just massive numbers of myrrhs, and you can hear them for quite some ways before you even get there. The chicks typically leave the nest in 2 to 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, and then the adults, just like the pigeon guillemots, will take care of the young and stay with the young for quite a few months at sea, teaching them the tricks of the trade. Myrrhs are considered to be the penguins of the north. They look a lot like a penguin. They have really long hind feet. They will take dives where they will go down as much as 300 feet deep in the water in search of fish and invertebrates. So it's the penguin of the north, the common myrrh. Here's one of our favorite birds. This bird we found in the summer, and it's in summer breeding plumage. It's the little marbled merlet. They typically hang out within a few miles of the shoreline. For a long, long time, ornithologists had no idea where this bird nested. They couldn't find nests on the rocks. They searched islands. They searched the coastal face. They could not find their nests. So in the early times, they offered a $100 reward for anyone who could find a nest of the marbled merlet. Well, in 1961, the first nest was discovered. It was in the top of a redwood tree. No one had looked in the redwoods for a marbled merlet nest. What's amazing is that when they come in from the sea, they usually come at dark, so people don't see them coming. They sometimes make their calls, so you could hear their call if you were really astute. And the same thing is true. They leave their nests in the redwoods, usually at dawn. So they usually leave before people are up and about and would see them. But we have managed to go to Prairie Creek Redwood State Park up in the north of California, and we have actually heard them coming and going to their nesting redwood trees. At Prairie Creek, there used to be 20 or 30 years ago, there used to be hundreds of marbled merlets that would circle the open fields before they headed to their nest. But recently, due to predation by Steller's jays, they think for the most part, and possibly ravens, the marbled merlet population has plummeted. And another reason is that they've logged a lot of the old growth redwoods. So they think at this moment somewhere, and it's hard for them to estimate the population accurately, but they think there's somewhere around 300 to possibly 800,000 marbled merlets left.
I'd say closer to the 300,000.
Yeah. Here's another picture that is startling. This bird in breeding plumage is brown and mottled, but in winter, they're black and white. It's an amazing transformation.
Yeah.
We were fortunate enough, Lucas has a friend who took us out on a boat out along the coast in December.
Where
and
we got these photos.
where we took these photos. And you can see what's cool about this is their little tiny bill, this straight line right to the eye, but the
Gape.
eyes, the gape line,
Oh,
and the eyes encased in black. And then they have this collar that goes around the back. And that helps to differentiate them from the
long-billed Merlet, which is an Asian species that sometimes shows up in California.
and it looks virtually identical other than that collar.
Yep.
So here's a back view of this same bird, and you can see how the collar on this lower bird goes almost all the way around. There's just a very thin black line separating the collars on each side.
Yep.
So another thing that we were able to see, because this his friend Connor's boat was able to ease up on these merlets, we saw how they took off from the water. They're so chubby and chunky that they essentially had to swim in this upper left-hand picture and get enough speed up so they could eventually get off the water. And then finally they were in full flight by this picture.
And
So-
these aren't easy birds to photograph,
No,
to say the least.
we've gone for years and not hardly even seen them. And usually you see them as a speck, and you can identify them in their winter plumage. Usually you can identify them by seeing this white slash on their wing. It helps to differentiate them from others.
Yeah.
And if you look at their underwing when they fly right here, they have a very dark underwing. So the next bird that's very common on our pelagics as we get out much further is the sooty shearwater. The sooty shearwaters, they believe, have a population of at least 20 million, maybe 30 million. It's one of the most abundant and numerous of all seabirds. They breed in the South Pacific, in New Zealand, in Australian waters, in islands down near Antarctica and Chile. What's amazing is that following breeding, the adults will do a circular route going from the New Zealand area up along through Micronesia, Asia, up along the Japanese coast to Russia, to China, then to Russia, and over to Alaska, and then down the North American coast, all the way back down the South American coast, and swing back along Antarctica to New Zealand. The adults, they believe, have a route that is about 20,000 miles. The amazing thing that they've learned, and here they are, this picture shows how graceful they are in flight. I really think that the sooty shearwater is one of the most graceful birds that there is. They have a beautiful kind of a silvery underwing that you can see right here on this bird. But then when they take off and are flying, they're just really graceful, gliding. And when there's waves, they just soar just right on the wavelength, just right above the waves. This is a picture of the migration route that they take. So they're breeding in New Zealand, and they come up through Australia and Papua New Guinea, up to Japan, Russia, across to Alaska, down the North American coast, down the South American coast, and back to New Zealand. What's even more amazing is they put trackers on some of the immature birds, and they discovered that they leave their breeding grounds and they might go over to South America and then cut across the Pacific over to Japan and back down the coast of North America and cut back over to New Zealand, a sort of a figure 8 loop that they take. And this loop, they figure, takes them about 40,000 miles. One of the amazing things is that these birds will rest on the water some of the time, but often they will spend most of the time flying the entire time. And scientists just couldn't figure out how they were able to perform this miracle until they determined that actually they fly with half of their brain asleep and half awake, so that they can continue flying for miles and miles and miles, sleeping one half side at one point and the other half side at another point. This is the little chunky Cassin's auklet, which we encounter quite a bit once we get out at sea. It's almost like a little powder puff ball. They have a really large head and a big bill and a chunky body. They tend to feed on krill and copepods, and they're widely distributed all along our west coast, probably 3.5 million of them. They're abundant. They love to sit right off the continental shelf, all the way from the west coast of North America, all the way over to Japan and Russia and Asia. They nest in little burrows on offshore islands. Here's the next bird we often will encounter, called a Rhinoceros Aquif. I bet you can guess how they got their name. They have that little horn on the top of their upper mandible in breeding plumage, and it was how they were named. They breed in Alaska, British Columbia, and northern Washington, and then they head south for a limited distance. So we can pick them up in this area. They're a fairly common bird off the coast once you get out a ways on the coast. The Rhinoceros Aquif, a very kind of chocolatey brown configuration, but you can see these rows of white feathers stemming from the eye and from the chin, and that's a one field mark, as well as the horn on the mandible when they're in breeding plumage. The next bird that is really common in our area at certain times of the year is the northern fulmar. The fulmar is a tube nose. If you take a look at the nose carefully, they have this tube above their bill that allows them to smell. So they actually do a lot of their hunting for food at night when they can smell fish that are coming to the surface. They'll eat all kinds of fish. And the amazing thing about them is that they only lay one egg. So they believe that the fulmar is one of the longest living seabirds. They begin breeding around 10 years of age, and they breed for 30 or 40 more years. So they live to be probably 50 years or more. Pretty amazing. Here's a close-up of the dark morph. They come in two color morphs, the dark morph and the light morph. Here you can study the bill even more. Here's the tube nose. Here's the upper mandible with a sheath on it, and the lower mandible. And here is a white morph. Same species, they'll interbreed. Sometimes they're breeding, there'll be colonies of mostly white northern fulmars. Sometimes there'll be colonies of mostly dark northern fulmars, but sometimes they intermix. I've heard they have an awful smell too. Another animal that can have an awful smell when it surfaces is the blue whale. Once you get out by the Farallones, we've had incredible luck seeing blue whales in the waters off the coast. We have had as many as 15 to 20 blue whales in close vicinity to our boat. They're just an amazingly enormous and beautiful species. They have a very kind of light colored gray back with a tiny little stipple dorsal fin right here near the end of its flukes, near its flukes. One thing that happens when a whale of this massive size, they're the largest living thing of all time, the largest animal. They may weigh as much as 300,000 pounds. So when they submerge, the water gets this really beautiful light blue glow that probably surrounds the animal as it submerges. And it's called, they leave what's called a footprint, a blue footprint. Here's another one that just surfaced right near our boat, and it blew its blue blowhole, and you could smell this individual from quite a distance. So on to a few shearwaters. One of the shearwaters that loves whales is the pink-footed shearwater. You can tell them from the sooty shearwater that we saw before is that they have a very white neck and breast, and a very white underwing, as well as a pinkish color bill. See the pink color bill. Here's a close-up of a pink-footed shearwater in the water. They breed on islands off Chile. They love feeding on fish and squid. And they're fairly common in our waters starting in July. The next shearwater I want to show you is the Buller's shearwater. This shearwater breeds on islands of New Zealand on the North Island, the small islands off from the North Island of New Zealand. After breeding, they head north to the sort of the rich Arctic waters for food, and then come down along the west coast of North America from British Columbia to South America. They are regularly seen in low numbers on most of our pelagic trips. One of the things we notice is the stark sort of white and darker color of the back and the under bird. But the other thing, in flight, they have what they call is a black M on their back. This is the Buller's shearwater. They're just a gorgeous shearwater in flight with that black sort of M or W on their back. Another shearwater that we were lucky enough to find this last year or two is the short-tailed shearwater. This is one right here. This might be another one right here, or it might be a female sooty shearwater. How we know this one is the short-tailed shearwater is how short the bill is, how steep the forehead is, giving the really round look to the head. Compare this bill right here to a sooty shearwater's bill right here. It's much shorter. To me, it appears thinner. Here's another picture of the same bird as it floated away. Look at the bill size compared to the pink-footed shearwaters here in the lower part of the picture. Here's another picture of one that we found on our most recent trip. And in flight, they're much a darker brown, chocolatey brown with some light tones on the secondaries, but much darker on the underwing. Here's another shearwater called the flesh-footed shearwater. We've waited several years before we could find a flesh-footed shearwater. And then on several trips recently, I think we saw the first one in 2018. And then out of Bodega, we saw one last summer. And we saw one Half Moon Bay last summer. And recently, we had another one in September of last year. So Bodega is where we were able to find these. They're all chocolatey brown, the entire bird's body with a very pink bill, and they're called the flesh-footed shearwater because when they fly, you can see their flesh-colored feet as well as their flesh-colored bill. Very dark, even underwing on these birds. Here's another bird that we enjoy very much. This is the black vented shearwater. This photo on the left is not my photo. You can see how nice it is compared to my photos over here on the right. It was taken by Shezi Yusuf. The first time we saw these birds was in Monterey because it's more of a southern migrant. And so on another trip that we took out of Ventura, we saw quite a few black vented shearwaters. 1 year in 2016 and maybe part of 2015, the waters were warm up here in the north and the black venteds came up with the water. So we were able to see them right here in Marin and Sonoma counties as well. Okay, so it's named for this black vent right here, black vented shearwater, the black undertail. One thing you may not know about shearwaters is that they will often return to their colonies at night. So at night, their colonies are chattering all about. When they're actually incubating, one of the parents, usually the female, will stay on the eggs and incubate the eggs, and the other one will go out to sea to feed. But they typically don't come in and out of the nest during the day. They wait for nightfall to come in and out to prevent predators from finding their nest. So these birds, these birds will come as far north as Monterey many years, and very seldom will they come up to Sonoma in our area. So here is a very similar looking bird, but it's smaller. This is the Manx shearwater. Again, I'm using a picture here from John Petruzzi on the right, just because my pictures were more distant and I wanted you to have a good look at this bird. So beautiful white, starting right from the chin all the way down to the vent. So they have a white vent that helps to distinguish them from the black vented. So let's look at some of our mammals that we're seeing. This is a rhesus dolphin. Dolphins tend to be larger than porpoises. They're usually somewhere from 7 or 8 feet to about 13 feet long. These rhesus can weigh as much as 1,100 pounds. If you look at the next photo, you can see all this scarring on the backs of this rhesus. Unlike most dolphins, the rhesus has a fairly blunt head, but you know it's a dolphin because this dorsal fin is curved like a hook almost, or a shark's tooth. So this is the rhesus dolphin. They think is at least 35 years or more. So typically they're found in groups of 10 to 30, but sometimes they can be in groups of 1,000. So rhesus dolphin. Here's a picture of either a young one surfacing by an adult, or it's another adult that just the size proportion looked weird in this photo. But you can see what a rounded head they have. Most dolphins have a bit of a snout on them, but this particular one does not. So here's one of the things that rhesus will do. They can swim so fast that they set up a spray from their tail, and this is called a rooster tail. Kind of looks like a rooster tail, and you can tell that it's rhesus dolphins when you see this rooster tail. Another species or two will also do the same thing, but typically rhesus will do that. And then another behavior they enter in is called tail slapping, where they just like raise their whole back end out of the water and slap the water, sending up a spray. We found it really entertaining. The next picture shows a shark that we found on one of our trips. We're not sure if it's a great white or a blue, but it was a very large shark. This shark probably was at least 12 feet long. Anyone who knows sharks, feel free to enter in more information. This is another one of our favorites. It's called the Dall's porpoise. It looks like almost a mini orca whale. And on our last trip, we had Dall's porpoises that came right along the boat and actually bow rode with the boat. If you look at the snout of this porpoise, it is not very pointed. It's more or less rounded at the top. They also have, if you look at their fin, a more triangular fin rather than a curved fin of the dolphins. So if this works, you're about to see a little video of these Dall's porpoises bow riding. It might make you a little dizzy, so beware. I'll turn the sound down a little bit. There they are. They're looking like little mini orcas that are just coming along the side of the boat. Typically, Dalls are pretty shy and they usually don't bow ride like this. But the group that we found was a little bigger than normal, and they got up the courage, I guess, to ride the bow of the boat. You're about to see the tail flukes there with white on the sides of their tail. There you go. All right, so our next photo shows another marine mammal, the common dolphin. So dolphins, if you remember, tend to be bigger than the porpoises. The common dolphin can weigh up to 500 or 600 pounds. They're usually about 8 feet long. So this is the back of a common dolphin. Notice you can see the curved dorsal fin, so we know it's probably a dolphin. And whoops. And here's the next photo. I love this photo right here that just shows the waters parting as it starts to dive. And in this group, we actually came upon a pod of probably over 1,000 common dolphins. And they were coming out of the water and fishing eagerly with these shearwaters. Here's one that actually completely porpoised out of the water right in front of us, and it was able to get this shot. There was a sea lion porpoising too. They will porpoise when they're feeding in a frenzy with lots of schooling fish, or if they're being chased by some predator. So here's my last video here, and you're going to get to see how big this pod of common dolphins is. It's, according to Alvaro in the tape, it's a megapod.
Yeah.
I think there's another word for it when there's so many, but look out far in the waters to see how many are coming by our boat. Hopefully you don't get seasick here.
What's the term for this, Alvaro? There's another term too, I think.
If anyone knows the other term, I'm still trying to look it up. But there were easily 1,000 dolphins in this group. It stretched as far as you could see in both directions.
Yeah.
Is that amazing?
Oh, sea lions.
It was really thrilling to see this many mammals right next to our boat. There we go. So on to a few birds now that we've seen some dolphins and porpoises. This is the ashy storm petrel. It's a very endangered storm petrel. It's probably the rarest storm petrel in the world. And we're lucky enough that half of their breeding population is on the Farallones. So we get to see ashy storm petrels. It may be the most common storm petrel in our area, but people will come to California to find this ashy storm petrel. It's a very kind of ashy gray coloring throughout. Sometimes we've come on flocks of ashies, as many as 300, 400, 500 storm petrels resting on the water. A close cousin is the fork-tailed shearwater. This fork-tailed right here, you can see the fork in the tail. It's a much lighter gray color with kind of very bright white markings on the back, and this dark underwing with sort of a dark eye, sort of almost like a black eye, distinguishes the fork-tailed storm petrel. Storm petrels are only about 8 or 9 inches long. They're very small birds, but they have maybe a 15 or 20-inch wingspan. Is that amazing? So the first two that you've seen are the most common in our area, the ashy storm petrel. They sort of dance on the water and they pick off little micro planktons on the surface of the water. So the ashy and the fork-tailed. If we get lucky, we see one that comes up from the south called the black storm petrel. And black storm petrels are quite a bit larger. They have a longer wingspan. You can see on this one just how long those wings reach. And they have a dark rump, and not to be confused with the ashy, because their coloring is fairly similar, but they fly very differently too. With their long wings, they have a shallow wing beat, and they will often just ride at the back of the boat, and you can take photos of them when they come up close. If you're lucky, then those were the three most common. If you're lucky, and this is a photo taken by one of Lucas's friends, Eddie Munson, on a trip that we took out of Bodega or Half Moon Bay last summer. This is a Wilson's storm petrel. The thing you'll notice about this is obviously the white rump, the square kind of tail, and the feet actually appearing behind the tail. So the feet are longer than the tail, has a very stocky wing. The next picture shows you this dimensions really well. This is not my picture. I wish it was, but this was taken from the Cornell's Birds of the World. But you can see how thick the wing is and how stocky it is. And that really affects the way they fly, sort of a chunky bird flight. So closely related, look at how this one is different. See the stocky wings on the Wilsons. This is the Townsend storm petrel, and we went down to Ventura to see this bird along with a few other birds. Very similar in coloration to the Wilsons, but look at how long and thin the wing is in comparison. So the Townsend's has a long, thin wing, angular wing, and a more bouncy flight, and that white rump patch that wraps around a little bit. Here's another view of one that I took. So very closely related to this is the Leach's storm petrel. Leach's storm petrel actually breed on the Farallones, and we got lucky to see one out there last summer, but typically they're seen further south. So we found this one out of Ventura with David Pereksta. So the difference is in their white rump, it's bisected by this brown sort of triangle and line. I think the next picture shows you that bisection just as well. Again, they're a dark storm petrel with a white rump, but a bisected white rump. A close subspecies is called the Chapman's storm petrel. Notice, and these, the white is almost completely covered up, and they're just little pockets of white on the sides. And they consider this to be the same species as the Leach's, the Chapman's storm petrel. At one point they were separated, and now they've put them back together. Okay, on most pelagics, virtually all pelagics, we'll see phalaropes out at sea, and they frequently will feed on seams between one color of water and another, probably because there are two currents going side by side and bringing up food to the surface, little micro krills and microorganisms that they feed on. This is the redneck phalarope. You can see a little bit of the brooding plumage left over in some of the females. Unlike other birds, female phalaropes are more colorful than the males. And here's one on the water, a close-up, and one taking off. This is one of my favorite pictures of all time, this red-necked phalarope. In the winter plumage, they have this sort of dark eye line and a dark cap and a very, very thin bill. And their back, if you looked at this, has little streaks on their back. So the red-necked phalarope is the most common phalarope we'll encounter. And if we get out far enough, we'll see the red phalarope. The red phalarope in breeding plumage has a bright red breast and neck. You can see little pieces of that red still remaining on the winter plumage of this one. They have a very pale gray, almost streakless back, and a much thicker bill than the rednecked. Look at the redneck's bill here, how thin that is, and how thick the red phalarope's bill is, with a much more stout line through the eye and a white crown rather than a dark crown of the rednecked. So on to a couple albatross. This is the most common albatross. I think we counted at least 50 albatross on a trip that we took a couple weeks ago. 50. It's amazing because the black-footed albatross nests not in this region. They nest in the Hawaiian Island archipelago, and there is a small breeding population, they believe, in Baja. They are basically a chocolatey brown when they're an adult. This one was coming in for a landing, and I took this series of pictures just so you can see how awe-inspiring they are. Their wingspan is 83 inches, so even bigger than the brown pelican, but their wings are very thin. On the underside, it's sort of a mottled brown with a little bit of white showing through. They have that white face patch just behind the bill and a little bit of light coloring on the head. And this one is coming in. It's folding its long wings and looks like this when it's sitting on the water. So this is the black-footed shearwater. Again, just like the storm petrels, they can fly continuously from the Hawaiian Islands to North America, just with half their brain resting and half their brain active. Here's one we saw eating its favorite food. They tend to feed on squid and octopus. I'm not a specialist in marine invertebrates, so I'm not quite sure what this cephalopod is or whatever it's called. It looks like an octopus to me. A close relative is the Liaison Albatross. Once again, the Liaison has a nesting colony in the Hawaiian Islands. If you've ever gone to Kauai, they actually nest right on Kauai, I think on a couple of other islands as well. And they make the long trek over here. And we don't see them on every pelagic. Maybe 1 out of 4 field trips or pelagics will see one. Here's a beautiful adult. You can tell them obviously from the black-footed by their white head and breast and their white on the rump. But this is one of my favorite pictures too, showing just the breadth of these wings. It's not quite as long as the black-footed, but it's just a miraculous thing to see in flight. They'll come soaring in and soaring, and they'll be gone in a few seconds. They fly so fast. Again, this one was lighting on the water. One of the birds we love to see when we're out on the sea are terns. This is a common tern that came by fairly close to the bay. Notice the black cap. This is an immature, the dark black bill, and the black carpal line right here on the wings, the common tern. It's common in the east. It is not common in the west. Here is its cousin, the Arctic tern. One difference you can see, they both have very slender wings, but the Arctic tern, the wing seems to go on forever, as does the tail. And the bill of the Arctic tern is much shorter and thinner than the bill of the common tern. Look at the bill right here on the common and the bill on the Arctic. Here's an Arctic in breeding plumage, just so you get to see one in breeding plumage with the long, long forked tail, the black cap, and the orange bill, orange-red bill. And here are some of my photos just in comparison. The breeding plumage, the immature, and the Arctic tern here. So common terns on the right and Arctic tern on the left. This is another one of my favorite photos. There is a Sabin skull with these beautiful white triangles on the wings and a white rump with a little fish. And it looks like this black-footed albatross is going to try to rob that bird of its fish. Oftentimes you'll come on a flock of Sabin skulls on the water. This last trip, we had flocks of about 50 Sabin skulls at a time. They're known for this white triangular patch on their wing, a gray mantle, a very, very white wing, and they have a black bill with a yellow tip. These are different stages of molt. So in the breeding plumage, they have a black cap with their black bill and yellow tip. Here's a picture of one in flight, again, sort of starting to molt out of breeding. And here's one that's in true breeding. And this is one of my favorite pictures because I took this in Napa. A Sabin skull wound up on our WTP, on our water treatment plant, one September. And I sat down on the ground and the bird floated right up to me for this picture. It was September 12th, 2018 in the Napa WTP. So we made it out to the Farallones, and one of the birds on the Farallones that's really fun to see are these brown boobies. Boobies have this really large conical bill. They're related to gannets. Gannet is a boobie. When you look at them close, they often use these bills to preen and to show off for their mate. In flight, the brown boobie is pretty amazing to see. It's actually a common tropical bird, and they've been making their headway up north. It has a distinct breast line, so the brown chocolatey head and the upper throat to the breast, and that distinct line, white line right here, helps you to know that you're looking at a brown boobie. They feed mainly on flying fish. Now, we got lucky on one of our last pelagics. This was in September of last year on Bodega let's see, is that correct? Yeah, we saw this on a Bodega Pelagic out of Redwood Regional Ornithological Society out of Bodega. And it flew by the boat. We were all just completely blown away. This is an immature red-footed booby. You can see the bill tones coming in right here. When we've been at Hawaii, we've seen the adults that look like this. So they have a red face patch, but a very snow white configuration with the red feet. But so compare this photo now to the immature right here. So you can see the red tones on the bill, the kind of the blue cast of the bill, and you know the model appearance of the immature red-footed booby. So we went to Ventura, or actually on another trip that we took last year out of Half Moon Bay in October. This Nasca Boobie flew by and landed on the water right near us. The Nasca was at once thought to be a masked booby. They look virtually identical when they're adults. The difference is their bill color is different. And what they've determined is that they nest in different areas. So they are not the same species. They've done blood work on them and they separated them a while back. This is the Nasca Boobie. You can see sort of an orange cast to the tip of the bill. Eventually in the adults, this will be orange. There was one down in San Diego Harbor, I believe, a couple years back. So this is the masked booby that they once thought was the same species as the Nasca. This is out of Ventura. We saw in 2018, September. They also call it the white booby because it's so white. It is, other than the Nasca, it's the largest booby, a 32-inch body and a 62-inch wingspan. They breed on the Hawaiian Islands and also on the Caribbean and in the Tasman Sea, so they're more spread out. Here it is on the rocks. I forget which of the islands it was on, but the island's off from Ventura. So now we're back at the Farallones. This is a tufted puffin. They breed on the Farallones and they make their nest on a rocky face right like this, put in a little bit of seaweed and plop down their egg. And their young, once they're born, are pretty agile, and they eventually will fly off that ledge and plop into the water, and then they take care of them. So here's the, oops, I don't know how that happened. Here's a close-up of one. Notice their bill is just so incredibly beautiful. And the species that we have in our area, the tufted, has these two beautiful white tufts. There's also a horn puffin, but so far we have yet to see one. So onward, we're getting close to the end here. If people are starting to drowse off, take a stretch. This is one of the birds we want to see on every trip are the little merlets. And this is one of the first merlets we saw up north. And we should have seen what we thought would be a Scripps merlet, but it turned out we found the rare southern merlet, the Guadalupe merlet. It's probably the rarest of all the merlets. Its body's only about 10 inches long, so unless you're close, it looks like a little speck on the water. They have maybe a 15-inch wingspan. And what separates the Guadalupe is this white that goes up above the eye, and the eye is all sort of surrounded by white in this little tiny merlet. At one point, they thought that it and this next bird, which is Crevary's merlet, they thought, or sorry, Scripps merlet, they thought was the same species, and they called them Xantu's merlet. So Scripps and Guadalupe, they thought were the same species. The difference is this eye is all encased in black. So go back to the one before. See how the white goes up above the eye and around the eye? So that's the Guadalupe, and here is the Scripps. The Guadalupe nests on only a few islands down in the area of Baja and northwestern Mexico. And it disperses north once breeding season is over. So occasionally they'll get this far north. So here's the last little black and white merlet called the Crevaries that I said before. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Notice how there's tons of black encasing the eye on the Crevaries. So they're pretty easy to tell from the other two, from the scripts. See how there's got a white chin on the scripts? Right here, this white chin. Now look at the Crevaries. Still some white, but the black comes way down here, surrounding the eye. So this is a little ancient merlet. Ancient merlets have a huge wide distribution all the way over to Japan and China. And they will breed all up in the Arctic. And then after their breeding season, they'll slowly make their way south. And we've been lucky enough to see them a couple of times. This one actually, we photographed at the Duran Jetty in Bodega in July 2017. On our last trip, we had this marvel. This is a parakeet auklet. They're exceedingly rare. They're basically range from Siberia and the Gulf of Alaska to the Bering Sea and the Aleutian Islands. And then after breeding, they'll start drifting south in the winter months, but we very seldom see them. People have been all on Twitter because there's been a parakeet auklet on the rock over in San Francisco that people have been going to on the coast of San Francisco there for the last couple of years. It's returned year after year. But this one we found on the open sea on our last pelagic that was actually arranged by a friend of Lucas's, who's one of his California young birder buddies. And we got really close to it. You can see this beautiful kind of bulbous bill with an orange sort of sheath on it and the white feathers descending from the eye there. We'll wind up with just a few of the predators that we might see on the open sea. We saw earlier the Parasitic Jaeger. This is the long-tailed Jaeger. There's two bright white shafts in the outer primaries of the long-tailed. These are immatures, but what you notice about the long-tail is the slenderest, most sleek Jaeger. It has very thin, almost tern or gull-like wings compared to the thicker, stocky other Jaegers. Here's in breeding plumage, it has this beautiful cream color under a dark cap and the long, thin wings with the one or two bright primary shafts distinguish it as the long-tailed Jaeger. A close-up of the juvenile and a couple, and that's it. So here is the biggest Jaeger that we have, the Pomeranian Jaeger. It looks almost like a tank compared to the last layer. Look how graceful and sleek this one is. Look how chunky and thick this particular one is. Look at the bill close up if we can get a look at the bill. A much more massive bill with sort of an enlargement right here in the goniales, I guess it's called. Another one showing the body and just the structure of the Pomeranian Jaeger. Probably the most common Jaeger in our area. Here's one in breeding plumage that we took on the last trip. And the reason why you can't always use coloration, because the breeding plumage of the Pomeranian looks a lot like the other Jaegers. Very dark brown back, white shafts showing, and it has twisted rectrices. The tail feathers, the central tail feathers twist and make a little plume right here that tails out the back in breeding plumage. Here's a close-up. This particular one flew right at the boat. In fact, it was so close, I couldn't get a great picture. And one of Lucas's friends, Connor Cochran, snapped this picture, and I'm jealous because it's a perfect picture. You can see the twisted tail feathers, the beautiful sort of yellow tones of the chin color here, and the band, and the beautiful bill, Pomeranian Jaeger. Here's another fish that you might see. It's called a mola mola or sunfish. The thing I never knew, I've always seen mola molas that were maybe, I don't know, 50 to 100 pounds, maybe 200 pounds. apparently they can get up to 2,000 pounds. And the captains in the seas where they're common are very fearful of hitting one because they can do damage to their boat as well as damage to the fish. Imagine running into a 2,000 pound mola mola. It's also called the ocean sunfish. They don't have too many predators, but they are big enough and slow enough that sometimes killer whales or sharks might attack them. They're related to the pufferfish, but they will eat small fishes and fish larvae and squid that float nearby them. Okay, moving on. Here is the tail flukes of a humpback whale descending in front of us. Another one. And here's one breaching. My favorite story was my very first pelagic I took with Debbie Shearwater out of Bodega Bay, sometime around the year 97. And I can't remember the year. I'll have to look up in my records. But our boat at one point was surrounded by probably 30 or 40 humpback whales, and they all decided to breach and splash the boat. And my oldest son, Graham, was so seasick, he could hardly look up to see the whales that were breaching all around the boat. This is one of my pictures. This was a stock picture. Sorry, it was not my picture. I wish I had gotten that one. That is not my photo. But here is my photo of an orca. More and more, we've seen orca whales in the Farallones area and out of Half Moon Bay. This is one of Lucas's friends, Lucas Corneliuson's picture of an orca whale. And finally, on the last trip that we took, we finally went out over 40 miles, 45 miles from the coast, and we found our first Hawaiian petrel on the mainland. We've seen them in Hawaii, but they have this beautiful, rich cap with these dark splashes on the front of their wing and a very white belly. Here's a couple pictures I took. This was taken by Connor Cochran again. And here's two of my photos. And finally, we'll end with the massive predator called the South Polar skua. The skua is related to the Jaegers, only it's bigger, more massive. They nest in Antarctic, as their name South Polar suggests. They will feed on penguin eggs, unfortunately, and penguin chicks, and any other seabirds that are nesting down there. They're very much a predator, but usually when they take to the open sea, then they are looking for food from other birds that are flying by that they can scare up and make them drop. This is the South Polar skua. And that's the end of our slides. We hope you've enjoyed it. One thing I didn't mention is seasickness. We have done all of our pelagics. We have, we'll stop sharing the screen here for a minute. We've done all of our pelagics with taking bonine before we go, but we've actually, Lucas and I are somehow very lucky. We don't tend to get seasick. However, we have been on some trips where there were 14 or 15-foot swells, where you go down into a swell and you can see nothing but the wall of water coming at you. And you go up over the swell and you have a second to look out over for birds. We've been on other pelagics where it was glass calm. So it's really a variable amount of water that you might happen to have, very seas that you might have on a pelagic. We're trying to expand our pelagics into different months because later in the year you see different birds, earlier in the year you see different birds, and also north and south. So north, we're going to go up to Mendocino for a trip this summer, and we expect to see a few new birds up there up north. And then we've been down to Ventura. Someday we'll probably try to take one out of San Diego. San Diego, you have to travel overnight because the continental shelf is out so far. So questions in the chat, and please feel free to turn on your microphones here.
There's one question about the Myrrh colony at Point Reyes.
Okay. So it is, where is it? Okay, so if you actually hike out to the lighthouse, at the top of the steps, before you descend like 200 or 300 steps to the lighthouse, there is a little viewing platform. And if you go to the edge of the viewing platform and look down on the rocks, all of a sudden you'll see 10,000 common myrrhs sitting on the rocks at Point Reyes. And they should be coming in now, so they should be there right now. That's a good question. Yeah, the Farallones has a huge a group of common myrrhs as well. Probably 250,000 nest on the Farallones. It's deafening.
Gavin,
Yes.
hello?
Yes. Hello.
Oh, yeah, sorry, Mark, raised my voice there. I was calling my son out and for something else. And sorry for getting late to this, but been a long day already. Anyway, I just have a more general question. I noticed that you showed a lot of birds, of course, and a lot of other mammals. But my question, what is the best areas along the west coast of California to go see, I guess, a good amount of California birds, West Coast birds, and also whether they're coming from Hawaii or from other places, Mexico, whatever. And, you know, do you have to go very far for that?
Okay, so most of the birds I showed to you, other than the ones in the harbor at the very beginning, they're all out to sea. Starting at about 2 miles, you'll see a few species, but then you have to go out to the Bodega trips go out through what's called Bodega Canyon, and there's a canyon about 20 miles out or 25 or 30 miles out called Bodega Canyon, and there's upwellings in that canyon, just like the Monterey Canyon, and those upwellings bring in rich food sources, and the birds will hang out in that canyon. And then if you go a little further, you're on the edge of the continental shelf. So that's out about 25 miles, I would say. And then we typically will run down the edge of that shelf. And part of it in marin areas called the Cordell Banks. So we'll hang out at the Cordell Banks looking for birds, and we'll hang out in Bodega Canyon. And the petrels tend to be even further, maybe 10, 15, 20 miles off the banks. So on our last trip, we went out 45 miles to see the Hawaiian petrel, and we found the parakeet auklet on that trip as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, if you get a chance to go out on a boat to the Farallones, what's nice about the Farallones isn't that you'll see that many more birds, but there are nesting myrrhs, and there are nesting gulls, there's nesting puffins on the cliff face of there. There's nesting pigeon guillemots. So you'll see a number of the birds if you get to go out to the Farallones. And that whole Farallon triangle that's part of the National Marine Park that's out there is filled with whales, as the water there is so rich with food that you'll see blue whales. We've seen blue regularly, humpback regularly. We've seen a few fin whales. We've seen quite a few gray whale we don't typically see, but we've seen orcas on a number of times as well. So it's been really fun to go out for marine mammals as well as birds. Are there any other questions here? Well, this is our last speaker series of the spring, and we will resume them again in September. So we'll have the summer off for you to go out and do your own birding and take your own pelagics. So we hope that people have enjoyed our speakers. We've had some really wonderful speakers. We had Matt Allhouse speak on conservation ranching. We had Alvaro speak on birds of the wine country throughout the world. We had Dr. Johnson speak on, was he the one who spoke on grebes? I better pull up my sheet here. And a number of other people that have really blessed us with their talks. And every talk has been so different and so unique, but it's been really, really wonderful. So yeah, Matt Johnson spoke on, Matt is the one who spoke on barn owls in the vineyards. Dr. Bruce Lyon, remembers, presented on the golden crowned sparrows, their incredible behavior. Matt Allhouse was a conservation ranching. And then and Wendy Shakowitz spoke on tricolored blackbirds. So we hope you've enjoyed these talks. Mark Raisin and Meredith Elliott spoke on double-crested cormorants, and Dr. Floyd Hayes spoke on the Clarkson Western grebes of Clear Lake. So we hope these talks have been informative to you, have taught you something and taken you to some new place. We want to encourage, you know, one of our 4 missions is getting people birding, because the joys of birding will help you appreciate the habitats that the birds live in, and transform that kind of love of birds and love of the environment into action to preserving the environment and preserving birds. We hope that that's the natural evolution that our members will take, and they will do whatever's in their power to enjoy the birds and to do what they can to protect the birds. So that is our mission as an organization, and you know, I'm 100% behind it. I know Tom is as well. We're doing a lot of climate research with National Audubon. We're doing bird surveys on snowy plovers and bluebirds and so on. So join our ranks, you know, volunteer for what you can. We're looking for new board members all the time. So, you know, get involved and come with us on our field trips, and do what you can to participate in our activities. We enjoy it. If you are listening and are not a member, please join. It's only $25 for a membership for a year. It's very little money. Families are only $35. So please join us, support us, and participate with us.
Mark, Robin had a question.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
a comment, actually. I think you would know, but maybe you don't. Are you familiar with the repositioning?
With say that again. I didn't
Are
hear.
you familiar with the reposition?
You're cutting out at repositioning or reposition.
Yeah. So
Yes, where ships go back to their port. The repo cruise.
yeah, they go from Antarctica. They go from Antarctica to the north. The boats go up to Seattle and take the ships, you know, cruises along to Alaska.
Yes.
Anyway, it's a cruise, and it's really great for people seasick, because you're on a big ship. You can put a scope on a board. 3 nights. You go from San Diego to Vancouver, and it costs $200. And you go through, you start in San Diego County, you go to LA County, you go through all the counties up to Mendocino County, and then it gets dark. And so you miss the last couple of counties. You have to make a stop in Victoria. It's usually given around, we took one in 2014. And, you know, what's good about it is far out enough offshore that you can see Hawaiian petrel and many other boats.
Yes.
Wings does the trip with Paul Lehman.
Okay.
But you can go on his scouting trip, and he'll teach you the birds as you go
that's
along.
great. That's great.
It's a good idea to go with somebody that knows what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, I found it to go.
So your sound isn't coming through super well, Robin, but I'll repeat a little bit of what you said because I meant to start off this talk by saying I'm not a pelagic bird expert. Maybe Lucas is, but I'm not. It takes you quite a few trips to become familiar with the birds and feel like, hey, I know what I'm seeing finally. But what Robin was talking about is called a repo cruise or repositioning cruise. And they're very cheap compared to a cruise. I think they're 2 or 3 days and they go from San Diego up to Vancouver to position the boat back up there for their summer cruises. And we were gonna take one last year and then COVID hit. So we weren't able to do that. But the good news, as he said, is those repo cruises are bigger boats. So they don't go back and forth and throw you like you're gonna go overboard. And you can even take a scope so you can see birds that are further out. And there are enough further offshore that you get some of the petrel species that don't come close to shore. So petrels will hang out probably 40, 50 miles off the coast. So on most pelagics that are only 1 day long, you can't get out much more than 30 miles or so. So they're really good things. There are a number of pelagic experts in our, in California. Alvaro is definitely one of them. And David Pereksta down south is one of them. Lisa Hug up at RROS and Steve Howell that goes out with RROS. They're amazing experts and we've learned a tremendous amount from them. It helps to have young eyes. Lucas spots things when they're a speck on the horizon, and fortunately, he can usually direct us to them, and then we're able to pick up on them. But every boat, every trip is different. Some of the birds are seen from the back of the boat, and they call people down there, and some are seen from the front, and we call people up to the front, wherever we happen to be standing. But it's a ton of fun. As long as you don't get seasick. If you're a seasick prone, it's not all that much fun. I guarantee you. We've invited a couple of Lucas's friends out on trips and they've turned green about halfway through the trip. And what they say about seasickness is at first you think you're gonna die and then you wish you died. And then as soon as you get back on terra firma, you start feeling a lot better.
Well, the close, you probably can hear me now because I put on my speaker.
There you go.
The trips that really go out as far as you can do on a repo cruise cost you about $250 because you start off on Friday night and you steam out way past, you go about 200 miles out and then you bird that day and you come right back. And it costs a lot of money to do that trip because it's so much gas to do. And it's the better chance of getting seasick too.
The most trips out of Bodega cost about $150. I think a lot of Alvaro's trips are somewhere in that range, 150 to 180, somewhere in there. So it does cost a little bit of money, but it sure is a lot of fun. And it's such a different experience than birding on land. It's very different and very exhilarating.
Mark?
Yes.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt. I can wait if you got saying more about that.
No, that's
I'm not familiar at all with whatever you all are discussing. I'm totally a novice here. But I do have a curious question to ask you, if you don't mind. You mentioned, I think during your presentation, and again, I didn't see it all because I came in kind of late for a reason. And what happened is that I'm just curious, are you noticing more birds coming from Hawaii, making that long trip, which might be an indication of the climate change going on? Again, I'm not I'd be curious to hear what you have to say. I think you mentioned that several times that you were surprised to see certain birds from Hawaii coming this far.
Well,
or is it just
the Hawaiian birds that usually travel this far, the main ones are the albatross. And they literally can travel 2,500 miles in just a few days. They just spend the whole time flying and boom, they go fast and there they are. And one of the reasons birds come over to the Farallon area is because there's a lot of food in that area. It's sort of like the Arctic, but down here. That's the reason they also go to Monterey. One of the things they've been noticing over the last 20 years is that birds have been pushing north because the seas have been warming up. And so from Monterey, for example, 20 years ago, most of the storm petrels were right in Monterey in that area. It was rich with storm petrels. Now, storm petrels are fairly uncommon in Monterey, and they've moved up to San Mateo and up to Bodega in that area, in Marin County and Sonoma County, in San Mateo County. So things are changing. I'm not enough of an expert on that to tell you exactly how much, but 1 year, several years ago, there was a massive amount of warm water that was situated off the California coast. And that's when a lot of the southern birds came up and came further north to either get to that warm water. I'm not sure if the black-vented like the warm water or if they like the cooler waters just to the north of that big warm water blotch. And it's massive. It's something like 500 miles long, this big swath of warm water. And we're talking about 2 or 3 degrees warmer than the other water. So, I'm not an expert in that, but it might be worth reading about.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, I promised my wife we would end before 9 o'clock. I'm happy to take any couple final questions if anyone has some. Otherwise, we'll say good evening. Hi, Rita, how are you?
Good night. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question. Somebody posted this on a chat, and I don't know if you saw it. It's all the other talks that you mentioned. I've seen a couple of them, but is it possible to access those anywhere?
Yes, they're all on our website. And most of them, just like this one, we've recorded it. This particular one, the recording started a little bit late, but you'll get most of it. So if you go on the main webpage, on the left-hand column, it says on our webpage, and I'll read it to you because I'm looking at it right now. It says NSAS 2021 Speaker Series. If you click on that, it takes you to a page where there are links to all of the recordings.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yep. Perfect. Good question.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.
Take care. Have a great summer.
Yeah, everyone have a great
your
summer.
son.
It's gonna be nice and hot.
Join one of our field trips. All right. Take care, everyone.